How many of you guys have ever seen that fully enabled 100%, like every moment of every day? It's rare, right? It's tough. We're going to help with that. That's the goal of the workshop today. We don't want to go too far into like why it's important, but I think you can imagine for us, we've seen that the most successful sales development reps, business development reps, whatever you want to call them, lead development reps, they know what they should be doing and they're actively doing it. And when they don't know, they go and figure it out and they build the process so that they don't run into that situation again. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how we can help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't have to adopt this exact same process, but what we're going to talk about today is a system that Rex and I created. It's called Buckets. So if you've read our book, it's a very, very simple process that contains 4 buckets, right? 4 buckets. And the goal of this process is, as a sales development rep, someone who's focused on generating leads for our companies, we want to ensure that we're putting our time, energy, and effort on those activities that are closest to revenue, every day first. And then we want to work our way backwards, right? So the idea of the bucketing system is we can now identify what leads are closest to revenue, and once we identify them by bucket, we'll know where to spend our time, energy, and effort. So the first bucket is defined as the furthest away, and the last bucket is closest. So Rex, how does it work? What's bucket 1?
So, and you can ask anybody on our team, by the way, Shauna from marketing, Sean from the SDR team, you ask anybody at our table today, what are the 4 buckets? I guarantee you they can tell you forwards and backwards, okay? Bucket 1 is uncontacted, people we have never attempted to reach, or we don't know if the channel reaches them. We don't know if we have a good path on the phone. We don't know if the email is valid. That's uncontacted. How many of you guys have a bucket full of uncontacted leads somewhere in your CRM? Probably multiple buckets. It feels like a whole CRM full of uncontacted leads. Now, how many different dispositions are there for those leads, different lead statuses? I've worked at a lot of sales orgs. There's a lot of different ways to name it. We call it simple. Bucket 1, uncontacted. Hit us with bucket 2, Ryan.
Yeah, so bucket 2, once we've gone through uncontacted, we're going to move our leads into working. This is a very important distinction because when we think about the time, energy, and effort we spend at the top of funnel, our working bucket is the most important bucket for getting our activities up. And our sales leaders are always telling us, right, get more dials, get more dials, get more dials, especially all those outbound folks, right, because dials produce conversations. But when we go into our CRM and we load up leads that we're trying to prospect, if we haven't moved our leads from uncontacted to working and really distinguish these, we waste a lot of time calling bad numbers, navigating phone trees, talking to people that are not the right person. And so the thing we want to do with bucket 2 is clearly define leads that we've gone through the process of attempting at least one time in a channel and identifying and documenting the path as we get there. What does that mean? If I have a phone number for a lead that I've never contacted before, in order for me to move that over into working, I need to call the number and document the path, exactly what happens, right? If it's not a direct dial, I need to listen and press 2 for last name, right? And then when I press 2 for last name, I pay attention to my phone and I go 347 because it's Smith, whatever that is, I don't know, right? And I document that. And then when it rings through, I want to make sure that it actually gets through. It's not a bad number, it's not the wrong person, right? I have to listen to see if it's their voicemail, things like that. And so as I think about dialing and I move leads from bucket 1 to bucket 2, this is that work that takes a ton of time the first time, but the second time, the third time, the fourth time with this documented path, you start to dramatically increase the number of attempts you can do. And if you have a clearly documented difference between just leads that you've never contacted and leads that you've attempted to contact, when you get to the work that you're doing in bucket 2, these are numbers you can crank through. And you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the time and energy it takes to get from bucket 1 to bucket 2. You'll notice that a dial on an unvalidated or a first attempt number takes about maybe 2 or 3 minutes to navigate a phone tree, listen through all the options, wait, right? If you document it that next time, you can cut your dials by almost 2 minutes. It can take now 30 seconds to 15 seconds to get to that voicemail or get to that person.
So
will dramatically increase your velocity as you move into
well,
bucket 3.
And bucket 3 is the next iteration of this course. Real quick question for bucket 2. How many of you guys enjoy dialing through IVRs, the interactive voice response, like press 2 for sales, press 3 for last name? I thought there'd be more of you. So none of you enjoy doing it. So why do we do it so freaking often? That's the question of bucket 2. Why do we do it so much? Okay, so bucket 2, once we actually reach someone, we engage them in conversation. By the way, it works for email as well. If you've gotten someone, you're tracking their opens, and you know that that email reaches them and they open the email, holy crap, that's an active channel. Let's move them over to working. I can now justify doing a little more research. I could justify a one-to-one video. I could justify a whole lot more effort than if I have no idea if they ever use the email channel. So working, bucket number 2 works for all channels of communication, all right? So let's talk about bucket 3. Who can guess what bucket 3 is defined as? Anybody brave soul out there? Because I can tell you bucket 4 is meeting scheduled. That's cheating. What's the gap between bucket 3 or bucket 2 and bucket 4? What's bucket 3? Responded? Okay, we call them priority because you're right. They would have engaged in some level of conversation that didn't generate a meeting. Okay? So bucket 3 is called priority. Now, you're going to ask the natural question, and we get this question all the time. Bucket 3, isn't there a difference between people who said, I'm interested, call me back later, and people who said, no, I'm not interested? Those are all priority, by the way. Do you know why? Because the efficiency of going from bucket 1 to bucket 2 is about 50% of those are going to drop off. People you can't reach over that phone line, people who don't open the email, right? It's tough to get a hold of people nowadays, even less than 50% sometimes. Same thing going from bucket 2 to bucket 3. How many of these people will ever freaking pick up the phone, will ever reply to an email? If you're going to go back and spend your time trying to engage people, why not engage people you've already engaged before? You're going to be about 2 to 4 times more efficient with that outreach, okay? It's really, really critical to understand that. We've done the math. We've done hundreds of thousands of dials, done hundreds of thousands of emails. We know how it works. It's much, much, much more effective. So when we get into bucket 4, of course, those are the people who we either took from bucket 2. Well, buckets 1 through 3 could all generate a meeting, but almost every time it's bucket 3. We have a Slack channel on our team. Every time an SDR sets a meeting and they get it from bucket 3, they mention it. Hey, just got a meeting with this company, bucket 3. They're cheering for themselves because they know it was a lot easier to get that one than it was to go from bucket 1 or bucket 2 to bucket 4. Okay, does that make sense? Question, please.
What do you define as engagement? So somebody that is opening
Conversation. If you're talking about going to bucket 3, it's literally a conversation over email or phone. Or it could be in person, wherever you have literally spoken words, whatever channel, wherever you've been able to do that.
On social, it's a connection. You have an
Absolutely.
ability to actually message with them, not an email, but like they're connected now. There's a response there. You can think about this in any channel. Just because you can send your message doesn't mean it's now a priority lead. And when you get to priority, this is where you can start to do that hyper personalization. This is where if you messed up the initial cold call and you were a little bit messed up that first time, said, oh, I'm not interested. Well, you wait maybe 2 weeks. You do a little bit of research ahead of time because that person was really hard on the phone and just grilled you like, you don't know anything about my business, don't call me back. Well,
You guys ever heard that before?
yeah, you heard that one? Yeah? Great. A question?
Yeah, that was gonna be my question, like about the timing you said. So
Yeah.
priority and working or priority where maybe they said they're not interested, how long then do you wait?
How important is that lead to you? Right? So if your territory is small and this is a vital account for you to break into, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing whatever it takes to get to one of 4 outcomes, right? We're always looking for, yes, let's do this, I'm interested. No, not, no, hard no. Not, no, I'm not interested. But like
freaking no.
I didn't have an actual, like, I don't have an interest in this right now, but like unqualified no. Not a don't call me back no, because it's not, you didn't even have a chance to have a sales conversation. Not me working towards a referral, or not now. Not now being like, hey, this isn't a priority now, but go ahead and call me like next quarter, right? So until that happens, you want to schedule that out, and then we always make the recommendation that you should cut that time in half before you do your next outreach, because we all get busy and they're going to forget about you anyway. So the reality is, especially if this is a working to priority, they've never talked to you before, right? This is someone you've never engaged with. If they call them back 2 weeks from now, unless you just botched the heck out of it and like cursed at them or something, they're not going to remember, right? So it's your chance to try to reestablish that. Some might, right? And then that'll gauge your, timing for the follow-up. Maybe you wait a quarter next time, because then they're not going to remember, right? So If you have a large TAM, though, you don't have to be as aggressive. It's like, go on to the next lead, right? We want to sell to believers. We want to sell to people that are also willing to have a conversation, especially if it's a cold call. The reality is you might be able to overcome that with somebody that's aggressive in the future. But for now, let's go find those others that are more pleasant to talk to if you have a large enough TAM. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So what's your typical sales cadence you do? Because I feel like sometimes you can be over-aggressive and you're going to run people away.
What does that mean?
So sales cadence, you're trying to follow.
No. What does it mean to be over-aggressive?
That depends on who you're dealing with in your clientele, right? So we're dealing with government contractors. If you're overly aggressive, you're never going to talk to a single soul.
But what does that mean?
Yeah, define that.
Define overly aggressive.
It's like 4 calls a day, 100 emails a week.
That's not going to win you anything. Sending an email every day is they're actually going to just block you or unsubscribe.
Sure. Well, email for sure. Phone, again, this is the process, right? A dial attempt with no conversation doesn't mean anything. It's a case it doesn't exist, right? It doesn't matter, right? A conversation, you don't want, if someone says, no, I'm not interested, probably don't call them back again tomorrow. Give it some time. But a dial is a dial, right? You're trying to get to a conversation. So overly aggressive, I hear this a lot. I get this a lot because we call people every day for 20 days until we get to yes, no, not me, not now. That's our model. If I get to a conversation, I'll schedule follow-ups based on the outcomes of that conversation, my priority buckets. But for first conversations, until we have a connection, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to call as often as I need to until I get an engagement. And
Now,
for folks that are going to pick up the phone, it's not going to matter if you called them once a day for 3 days. You're right. Some people might say, you're being aggressive. You called me a lot. Don't call me back. Okay, now you know. They pick up the phone, and they don't like to be called three times in a row. Go wait a month, and now it's tagged priority. They pick up the phone, and my notes say, don't call them every day, right? And by the way, there's a great opportunity to follow up on that conversation with a video in an email and say, you're right, I'm so sorry, I know you're busy. The reason I think I can help you and why I was reaching out in the first place is because, when the time's right, I'd like to start that conversation.
So, and the point here, guys, is that you have a process, and if you don't, you should have one. We run buckets, and the way that you run your cadence is going to be based on your prospects, their buying habits. The thing we want to avoid, though, is it feels like. Okay, how many SDRs, if you're SDR management, have ever said, well, it feels like, or they never, these hyperboles or these feelings that get built into our process that aren't based on actual data. So we say track the data. If you were having 10% conversion from cold conversation to meeting and suddenly you're at 5 because you doubled the number of dials a week, cut that back in half. Stop doing that. You should be tracking those things. It's not that we're going to tell you exactly the number of touches. We don't believe in that term. Touch, that's just weird, and we don't really engage with somebody, then it doesn't count for anything. Like Ryan said, a dial is nothing. So the point here is you should have a process. A thing that I think we're going to be short on time for today that we'd like to hand out to you at least to get you enabled here is a calendar, because the big difference here is the step from having no process to having a process is a big one. It's a leap. You're going to need team enablement. You're going to need a lot of help with that. But the process and then owning who... Oh, sorry.
You're dead.
Hello. There we go. So going from having the process to actually working the process every day consistently, the only person who owns that is you individually. Okay?
How much time do we have?
We got 1 minute?
Oh, jeez.
2 minutes. They're being generous. Thank you so much. So we got so engaged in this because we love to talk about the details, because it's really important that you have a process, that you know the steps, that you know your buyer. I think that's really, really critical here. So we'll hand this out maybe as we're closing out our session. It is a calendar. It is broken down, I think, by the half hour. You can actually fill it out, and you should say, hey, we're going to block out time for bucket 4. I need to confirm my meetings that are due today and due tomorrow. Bucket 3. Now, depending on your buyer, the time of day, you might do bucket 3 before bucket 4, but not doing a bucket means you're not driving more leads into the next bucket, means you're not going to have more conversations, you're not going to drive more sales. So the point of that is to start putting that into your calendar and obsessively living by your calendar.
So yeah, this is, we really botched the timing here. So the real plan here, and this is so important, is you can talk about this all day, but the idea of zero white space, right? So we talk about a process. It doesn't matter if you follow our process or another process. You've got to be able to own your time and make sure you're paying attention to the right activities at the right time.
Hey, the guy who had the coffee on his day, guess what? Put that in your calendar. That's okay. You're allowed to have coffee. It's not like we're saying obsessively follow your calendar and never do human things like taking a break and playing ping pong. That's okay. Put it in your freaking calendar.
All right, well, let's get these calendars out. Sorry, guys.
We're going to pass it out to you guys. Please come see us at the booth. We'll share books and everything with you. Thanks.